Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to explore some fascinating stuff?
Always. What are we diving into today?
Well, someone sent us something pretty powerful, and it really got us thinking.
Intriguing. Lay it on us.
It's actually an excerpt from a talk called "My Mind Caught Hold Upon This Thought of Jesus Christ."
Okay, I see where we're going with this.
Yeah, it's a pretty loaded image, right? And clearly it resonated with this listener, so we wanted to unpack it a bit.
Definitely. There's a lot to unpack there.
So let's dive into this whole idea of like a single thought, especially one centered on Jesus Christ, and how it can hold such profound weight.
And profound it is. This excerpt uses Alma from the Book of Mormon as a powerful example.
Right, Alma's story.
And what gets me every time is how it's not just about, faith, but about this universal human experience. I mean, we've all faced despair at some point, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And finding a way out of that darkness, well, that's something we're all searching for.
For sure. And with Alma, talk about a turnaround. He goes from, and I'm quoting here, idolatrous unbeliever to this almost desperate, like, conversion experience.
It's a complete 180.
Huge leap, yeah.
And the excerpt, it doesn't shy away from how intense his despair really was. Those words, like harrowed up, racked with eternal torment.
Ooh, yeah.
That's visceral.
Yeah.
That's emotional rock bottom.
Yeah, you can just feel it.
He wasn't just casually like, oh, should I rethink a few life choices? He was utterly overwhelmed by his past.
This wasn't just a theological debate in his head. It was deeply personal.
Exactly.
And then, bam, he remembers teachings about Jesus Christ. Like, it's just this lifeline that suddenly appears.
And it's that exact moment the excerpt hinges on. Like, everything shifts.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's not just remembering Christ, right?
Yeah.
It's the language that's used his mind got hold.
Yeah.
What does that evoke for you?
It's funny you should say that because when I first read it, like the image that popped into my head was someone dangling off a cliff, fingers aching, desperately clutching for something, anything to pull them up. There's that urgency to it.
Absolutely. It's visceral.
It is.
On one hand, it just speaks to how desperate Alma was in that moment.
Right.
But on the other hand, it hints at the sheer power of that single thought.
Yeah.
Like in that moment, the thought of Christ, it wasn't just a comforting idea,
Right.
It was his lifeline. It was the only way out of the abyss he felt trapped in.
And what's crazy is it's like that thought, that catching hold of Christ, it pulled him out of this like purely emotional space into something almost, I don't know, tangible. He even says, when I thought this, I could remember my pains no more.
Wow.
That's like a total 180.
And that's where it gets really interesting, I think, from a psychological perspective.
Yeah.
Because you have this idea of what they call a salient thought.
Okay.
That one thought that just cuts through all the noise and grabs your attention. It grabs it so forcefully that it can actually change how you feel.
It's incredibly powerful. And for Alma, in that moment of crisis, the thought of Christ, it wasn't just an idea anymore. It became his reality.
His lifeline.
Exactly.
So you're saying, like, if we consciously choose to focus on, positive, faith-affirming thoughts, they can actually kind of rewire our brains and change how we feel.
Yeah.
There's a practical element to this too then, right? Yeah. It's not just about this one dramatic story.
Precisely. And the excerpt actually addresses this.
Does it?
Yeah, it's not about making Jesus like your only thought.
Okay.
But it's about that intentional shift, Like
Right.
Elder Andersen uses this phrase. He says, eagerly flow into our mind, guide us in what we think and do.
Okay.
It's about recognizing when our minds wander into negativity,
Yeah.
into those thought patterns that just drag us down, and consciously choosing to redirect.
That sounds a lot like what we hear about mindfulness these days.
Totally.
Being present, being aware of your thoughts, but without judgment, and kind of gently guiding your focus. It's like mentally hitting the refresh button. You've hit the nail on the head. It's about creating that space for thoughts that uplift us, that empower us. And the excerpt actually gives some really tangible examples of how people are doing this in their daily lives.
Oh, really?
Within their faith tradition, yeah. Things like intentionally using the full name of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Right.
Really being present during the sacrament, the time each week dedicated to reflection on Christ's sacrifice.
He mentions focusing on the sacrament. And for those unfamiliar, it holds, deep religious significance for Latter-day Saints. It's a time where they participate in sacred ceremonies and really connect with their faith. But even thinking about it more broadly, those quiet moments of reflection, regardless of your beliefs, they can be so grounding, can't they?
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
it all ties back to that intentional shift in focus.
Right.
Instead of letting our minds get swept away by just the chaos of life, we're choosing to actively cultivate those thoughts, those beliefs that bring us peace and connect us to something larger than ourselves. And then there's that incredibly moving story about the Johnson family.
Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't you say that embodies this perfectly?
Speaking of holding on to faith during the toughest imaginable times, their story is, wow, it stops you in your tracks. You mind walking us through it? Please do. It's such a powerful example.
So we have Matt and Sarah Johnson,
Okay.
a couple with 4 daughters. And Sarah is battling cancer.
Oh, gosh.
But even in the face of that, her faith is this huge part of her life. She's the one scheduling those regular family temple visits so her daughters can participate in baptisms for their ancestors.
Talk about strength, right?
You know,
Even as she's going through treatment, facing her own mortality, she's creating these incredible experiences of faith for her children.
exactly. And this is where your heart goes out to them.
Yeah.
She schedules a temple appointment for a Thursday,
Okay.
which is a departure from their usual Saturday routine. She's not feeling well, but that commitment is still there.
Wow.
And tragically, Sarah passes away early Thursday morning, the very day of the appointment.
Oh, my goodness. Unimaginable.
It's just the weight of that loss on the very day they were supposed to be reaffirming those eternal family ties.
Yeah.
You can't help but wonder how anyone could even cope.
I know. And you almost get the sense that Matt understandably wants to pull away. He sees the reminder on his phone and thinks, this just isn't going to work.
Yeah.
But then something remarkable happens.
He remembers who Sarah was.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
even in her final days, that unwavering faith, the solace she found in her beliefs, particularly in the thought of Christ. And in that moment of just profound grief, he chooses to honor her by carrying on.
Wow.
He chooses to catch hold of that same lifeline.
It's almost as if by going to the temple, he's physically stepping into that space where her faith still resonates so strongly.
Exactly. It's a tangible expression of that internal shift.
Right.
And what's so powerful is that he finds comfort, even joy in that space. He says, "While I feel deep sorrow and grief, I am shouting for joy, knowing my Father's wonderful plan of salvation."
Wow.
His grief didn't vanish,
Right.
but it didn't have the final word either.
It makes you think in those moments of crisis, maybe it's not about erasing the pain, but finding something strong enough to hold on to alongside it.
And that's the key takeaway from this whole deep dive, isn't it?
Yeah.
We all have those thoughts, those beliefs, those sources of strength that can help us weather those storms.
Yeah.
For some, it's the thought of Christ. For others, it might be something different.
Sure.
But finding that anchor and consciously choosing to catch hold when everything else feels like it's slipping away.
Yeah.
Well, that's a practice I think we could all benefit from.
Absolutely. It's a good reminder that even when we're at our lowest, there's always something there, something powerful enough to lift us up, if we're just willing to reach out and grasp it.
It really makes you think, what is it that serves as your anchor in those challenging moments? What thought, belief, or idea gives you that strength? That's something worth pondering.
Without a doubt. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive, and until next time, keep exploring those fascinating corners of your world.